everyone. This is our day 3 of the conference, which is also day 3 of the COCA Academy. For some of you who joined us earlier, we had our first day of the COCA Academy back in September, and the second day was in October. And so today concludes the COCA Academy, and we are thrilled with today's session. So we have talked about virtual fundraising events. We've talked about peer-to-peer fundraising. And today we are joined by Kate and Sarah from CCS Fundraising, who are going to talk about how to engage with donors during this time. We all know it's an awkward time, it's a difficult time. We're not really sure when to pick up the phone, how to continue to ask for money, lots of questions. And so they're going to help answer a lot of those questions today. So I am thrilled to introduce you guys to Sarah and Kate from CCS Fundraising, and they're going to talk to you all about how to engage with your donors during this time. So enjoy. Kate and Sarah.
Great, thanks so much. I'm Kate Villa. I'm a corporate vice president with CCS Fundraising. I've been with CCS for about 10 years. And before that, I worked in lots of different sectors, but some in Vermont, which is where I got to meet Hattie. So before we get into the meat of our presentation, today we thought we'd talk a little bit about how to engage, donors with major gifts. But we wanted to do a little bit of table setting, right, about the macro environment, because there's a lot that's going on in the world. And so we thought that it might be helpful to offer you some data about what the philanthropic landscape looks like today. So last year, which right now seems like it was a really long time ago, was the best year ever for philanthropy. And obviously things have changed, but the interesting thing is that they haven't changed as much as you might think. And again, if you look at this wheel, right, go back to the last slide there. If you look at sort of 68% individuals and 10% bequests, and then you look at foundations, and you know that a lot of those are family foundations, right? Just notice that we're going to talk a little bit about major giving, and that, a lot of the wheel is really individuals who can concentrate on major giving. But if we think about what's happening right now, right? And we think about data that's just been released in October by the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. Giving in the first half of 2020 was nearly 7.5% higher than in the first half of 2019. And that there was a drop. So the first 3 months and the first quarter of 2020 went down from the first quarter of 2019. But once the crisis hit in March, giving went up substantially. And the number of new donors went up by 12.6% over the same period. And so if you see, both small gifts, medium gifts, and large gifts were increased. And obviously the 6.4% increase in large donors is the kind of traction that gets you those big numbers. So important to think about that, whether these trends will endure. It does seem that we're seeing both new donors and big gifts. And so if we think about sort of what's the effect right now of COVID on fundraising. So we looked at the data of what's actually happening, right? Data for the first half of the year, we were up 50%. And CCS surveyed thousands of organizations across the country and across all sectors. We had about 1,200 responses in May and 1,375 in September. In the spring, when people didn't know what to expect, 63% of respondents projected that COVID-19 would have a negative impact on philanthropy at their organizations. By September, those projections were down to 53%. But when you compare sort of what people feel about what fundraising might do, and then the data of what we see that fundraising is doing, the data is way more positive. So when you have those conversations with your board or in your own mind, like, is now the right time to move forward? It's something to keep in mind. If we go to the next slide, right, there's a ton of factors that are affecting fundraising in 2020. Because people's feelings about politics, about market uncertainty, people have lots of feelings about the rising number of COVID. There was something that came out on climate change that said we're basically in the apocalypse right now, right? So there's lots of feelings that people can be having. right? And these feelings affect philanthropic confidence. And we believe that, this preponderance of factors could also have ripple effects on fundraising. But as these changes are playing out, and it's hard in real time to predict where fundraising will go, we want to keep looking at data, right? Because these feelings, right, are affecting people's idea of where it could go. We're seeing fundraising go up. On the next slide, we wanted to talk about what people were thinking they might do when we asked them directly. So we asked people how they felt about their fundraising. People were sure it would go down. And then when we asked donors, right, do you plan to maintain or increase your giving, right? 91% of donors said, I will either maintain or increase my giving. And as you can see, only 7% of people plan to give less. The 2% who don't know might be the only smart ones who say, there's all those factors that were on the last slide, and I'm not sure where I am now. But I think people understand that even in a really turbulent world, it's important to either maintain or increase donations. I'm betting the 7% who plan to give less might be among those folks who've been really affected financially, right? If you're in commercial real estate or the restaurant business, or lots of places, right now has not been great to you financially. So the next slide is just sort of, again, a little bit of data that shares some of the good news, right? So people have taken causes they think are critical to meeting this moment to heart. They've given, and they've given generously. So what does this mean for your organization, right? Every single organization that all of you represent is unique. And each of you will have your own set of unique challenges and opportunities in this environment. But we wanted to sort of set the table and say, right, the sky is not falling. People are willing to give, to answer the need that they know exists to support causes that they believe represent the change they want to see in the world. And so knowing that all of you are in the in-person business, right, both for hosting kids with cancer at camps and for traditional methods of fundraising, we thought it'd be important to focus on how to take what remains a strong macro environment for fundraising and adapt tools to focus on how to secure major gifts now. So if we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about sort of how to move towards major gifts, right? My colleague Sarah Crazen and I have both been saying, I always say, like, consultants have these things we repeat over and over again, right? Fundraising is a contact sport. We've lost our contact. But almost every organization, probably included, needs major gifts more than ever right now. Sarah Emerson is going to lead us through some really cool specifics to engage folks. But I'm going to continue to set the table a little bit further and share what we mean by major gifts. So I left this up for a little while, and I think it's really important for us to look, right? So what is a major gift? If you're working at a very large hospital, your major gift threshold might be $100,000 a year. If you're working at a very small grassroots organization, your major gift level may be $500 or $1,000. You need to think about what a major gift means to you. But you also need to make sure that you're thinking about an ambitious vision that makes a significant impact. It doesn't mean it needs to be different than the ambitious vision you already have. It just needs to be something that talks about, if we do this, we could get this. It relies on relationships, and it builds on prior success to reach a next level. And so if we move to sort of, the next slide, and we think about who your prospects are for major gifts, there's really sort of three places, right? There's those people who have the ability to make major gifts, right? They have either personally or through access, the ability to make those gifts. There's those who have affinity, right? We know that they like your cause. We know that they have some relationship to the cause. And then there's those who we can get to answer our phone calls. And those who have both the affinity to give, the ability to give, and that we can get to return our phone calls are sort of the golden triangle for major gifts. And if you look at those little slices, right, those who have both the affinity for our cause and that we have access to, but reside outside of that golden triangle of ability, right? Those are the folks that you keep loyal, long-term, annual fund donors, maybe move them towards bequests, right? If you look at the folks for whom you can get to and they have the ability, but they're really interested in climate change, and that's their top philanthropic priority. And so, oncology camps are not going to fit in. That's another set of issues. And then those who have the ability and the affinity, but we don't have access to, are another set. So we always say, like, focus on the golden triangle, but if your golden triangle doesn't feel big enough, right, you can always think about where people exist and how to, create the engagement moves, which Sarah is going to talk about, that will help you get to a good place where you can get them into that golden triangle. And then if you're thinking about sort of on the next slide, right, how you create an opportunity for that big impact, you want to make sure that it's an important problem. This is probably pretty easy for everyone on this screen, right? No one can say that cancer is not an important problem. You want to make sure that you have a concrete goal that's achievable, probably not next week, but over a longer term time frame. So whether it's building a new building, creating a new program, hiring a really important new person who's going to take your program to the next level, you want to make sure that there's a credible path or roadmap to achieve the goal, right? So we often hear that almost half of people's decision is based on whether they think the person in charge has both the leadership and the plan to achieve the goal in its totality. You have to be able to tell why philanthropy is the missing ingredient, right? We've got this concrete goal, we've got this path, we know this is an important problem, and we know that our path is what will solve it. And you need that strong leader and team to communicate why philanthropy is the missing ingredient. And so when you're looking at who to think about for major gifts, right, it's pretty obvious, right? People who've been in your events, who've donated through direct mail, who volunteer, your families, or those, even if you have social media analytics that engage with you a lot online. And so before I turn this over to Sarah, who's going to talk about some engagement tools, I just wanted to share one last piece of data. And so when you think about the next slide, which has a list of donor motivations, there's a lot of things that we worry about that are in those bottom 4 rows, right? Do we have the right person endorsing it and making the phone call? Is our pitch right? Have we got all the right pictures and all the right collateral that we need? What about our GuideStar ranking, or do we look like we're enough associated with an important hospital or medical center or other organizations? But if you look at the things that are really important that are on the top 4 rows to high net worth individuals, they're things that really you can control, right? So as long as you listen to your donor and you realize that they have interest in your issue area and they haven't told you repeatedly, I'm so glad you're calling me, but really I'm focusing my major philanthropy on climate change, right? If they have some experience that benefited from the organization, they believe you're recognizable or reputable, and they believe there's a need, those are much more important. So I want to just remind you that to keep bringing it up and don't think, gosh, we can't move forward because we don't have some small piece in the rows below. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Emerson, who's going to talk a little bit about the major gift cycle.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for being here today and inviting us to be with you today. So I'm Sarah. I'm also with CCS, Assistant Vice President, and talking to you from Portland, Maine. So very nice to be with you all. I've been with CCS for about 5 years, a little over 5 years now, and like Kate, has worked in virtually every nonprofit sector, and so hope that our experiences, and especially our crazy experiences over the past 8 months or so, can be helpful. I do want to say, if you have questions for us. Of course, we'll save time at the end for responding to questions, but we want to encourage you to pop those into the chat as well. And so that we make sure that we're speaking to areas that are of interest and applicable to your work that you're doing every day. So I guess moving on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships. So as Kate said, major gifts rely on relationships. And trust me, I know relationships can feel complicated sometimes. But I think we want to emphasize that you can do the very basics in terms of relationships, and that's a great starting point, and it can propel you quickly. So we put a really simple graphic here on this slide on purpose: relationship management. I would imagine that most of you have some sort of system for tracking your relationships, tracking who it is you're speaking with. But if you aren't using it, or if you aren't using it to the fullest extent, now is the time to change that. So as we're going to discuss in a few minutes, communication is more crucial than ever before, and you'll benefit so much from implementing and using a system to track your communication activities. This is what's going to help you move a friend of your organization from a prospect to a donor, and it's going to help move your good donors into great donors. So if we move on to this next slide, again, we tried to put something really simple here to describe the relationship continuum and way to visualize it. And for me, at least, as I look at this, it's helpful if I just imagine a person. So let's think about Susie Smith, who you know has an interest in your work. She's given every year for the past 3 years. And let's say the gifts have been pretty modest. And of course, that means different things for different organizations. But let's say for Susie, she gave $25 the first year, $50 the next year, and then last year she gave $250 because she's one of those donors that wants to give more. Given everything that's happening in the world, right? So you want to have some sort of system, first of all, to regularly identify people like Susie who regularly give and give more every year. And you really should interpret those gifts as a signal from her that she's happy with what you're doing. And so let's think back to that golden triangle that Kate shared a few minutes ago. And that had, these 3 circles: affinity for your cause, ability to give, and access, meaning they will return our calls. So we're trying to qualify Susie and figure out if she has those characteristics. And so we need to figure out to what extent those characteristics exist for her too. And I just want to note that sometimes the simplest solution is also the best solution. And a first step can be a phone call to Susie. It can be a phone call from you. It can be a phone call from a volunteer. But this kind of goes back to the concept of really listening to your donors. And sometimes all you need to say is, thank you so much for your gifts. Your growth and giving over the past 3 years is so encouraging for us. Tell me more about why you decided to give to us. And I think I can speak for Kate and for many of you when I say that when people say, tell me more about you and why you do what you do, they eat it up and they'll tell you a million different reasons. And all of a sudden you are able to qualify Susie Smith as somebody that should maybe move into your relationship continuum, into the cultivation, solicit, stewardship wheel we have here. And so this is when you get to build decide whether or not it makes sense to build a more robust relationship, which we'll talk about in more detail in just a few minutes. This is when we can move to a solicitation potentially, which Kate's going to be talking more about this, but it can happen very effectively over Zoom in our experience, which a year ago, I don't know if I would have believed, and now I'm a huge advocate for it. Then there's, of course, the stewardship piece, thanking the donor, and even more importantly, demonstrating impact to the donor. So if you can demonstrate impact during the stewardship phase, and you can begin to describe a vision and imagine a future with that donor in which even more of an impact can be made, that's when you get to reassess and requalify. And this person might become a major gift prospect as well as a regular donor. And they might be willing to think about some sort of transformational impact they can have with you in your mission. So that's my spiel on relationships. So moving on to relationship management. I mean, you can see here that the goals of effective relationship management are, they're pretty clear, and so are the benefits. But what isn't listed here in terms of benefits is that it actually puts your ambitious vision within reach. And it allows you to develop a credible plan to realize that vision. And if the pathway to the goal is clear, as you effectively manage these relationships, you're that much closer. And we can't emphasize enough, I would imagine many of you have experienced this already. Right now, people are craving a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and perhaps above all else, just a way to do something good in this world right now. And your work is that. And building and sustaining these relationships offers that to others, and that pathway to making a difference. So this relationship management piece just couldn't feel more relevant now. It's just so crucial. So I'm gonna move, well, there's nothing in the chat. So feel free to pop anything in the chat if I'm missing something or not making sense on anything. But let's move on to, in the next couple of slides, talking about engagement with donors in this environment. And the next slide, the title is Communication in Remarkable Times. Remarkable, can have, it's something to remark upon, that's for sure. So we're eager to hear from all of you about how communication, strategies have changed over time and what's worked well for you. I'll review some of our thinking about what is working well and what we're seeing with organizations. And like I said, I encourage you to share some of your experiences in the chat. So first of all, showing individual attention. So it's important for us to be continually checking in on folks and asking how they are doing. We're still in the midst of fairly intense times. I think back in March, we thought, oh, by the fall, maybe things will have simmered down. It doesn't really feel, feels maybe it's at a simmer instead of a rapid boil, but there's still a lot. And I know, even starting off email messages to people, right? It's like, hope you're having a wonderful week so far. And it's like, every day can feel like Groundhog's Day. So that feels like a funny thing to say. So it can be hard to get over that first hurdle of the outreach, but we want to encourage you to over communicate and don't be worried that you're communicating too much. And, keep in mind that old cliche that you have to tell people something 7 times before they're going to remember it. And, use all these different methods of communication. Social media. Some people are reading every email you send, and some people aren't, but appreciate a call or a handwritten note. And this is something that you can kind of track as you manage your relationships and have a system involved. Like, oh, always call Susie, after sending the email, so she's aware that you're going to be calling. It's important, of course, to acknowledge the complex challenges that are emerging right now. There's this intersection, of course, of the virus, coronavirus, with inequities that have existed for a very, very long time in our society. And I think that it's very possible to demonstrate a direct link between the challenges that we're all facing at the moment and your mission, your vision, your goals. Begin with and return to the why. Being clear about why it's important for donors to continue to support you in these difficult times is absolutely crucial. And, it's important to keep in mind, the voices and the experiences and the perspectives of those you're talking to and those you serve, and to keep that at the forefront. All communication and creative engagement should be part of a strategic, thoughtful plan to help your organization reach your goals. And, that's something that we at CCS emphasize over and over and over. So moving on to what donor engagement is looking like these days. I'll go back to the survey that Kate described. We connected with over 1,000 leaders and staff in the nonprofit world a couple of times over this period, right? So in May, we did a survey, and then we did a survey again in September to try to understand how donors are being engaged. So the dark blue bars on this slide represent responses from those folks in May when everyone's hair was wildly on fire. And then the teal bars represent responses from folks in September when maybe our hair wasn't on fire, maybe it's smoldering, but no longer fully engulfed in flames, right? And so you can see that the methods for engaging donors have evolved, and 3 out of 4 organizations are making personal calls regularly. Nearly half of participants are now using virtual briefings and virtual events or activities. Here we are, aren't we? Social media campaigns have leapt beyond where they were before. So, you know, Kate and I have been working with nonprofits throughout this time, and we're seeing these approaches work really effectively, and people are being really creative about how they are doing this sort of work. Yeah, I see, you know, Kate popped in here. Has anyone used any of these methods? Has anyone tried anything new that they weren't expecting they'd be trying? Trivia and auction events, fantastic. Deb, would you be at all interested in sharing with us what that was like, or how that went, or how it felt? A new e-newsletter.
Here we go. Can you hear me?
Hey, Deb, yes, hi.
Hi. Yeah, so I got hired in February, and of course COVID happened in March, and we had only hosted one of our gala. We just started doing an annual gala, and so we didn't want to lose the momentum, and we needed to keep everybody kind of engaged. So they asked if I would move it to a virtual, and, you know, trying to make it unique. And we had an auction, and we actually made double what we made last year because we got to reach more people, and people could do it from home. And, you know, I think people are getting more Zoom fatigue, but we hit it right at the right time. So that worked out really well. And then we did something super fun, which was a trivia night, and charged, you know, $15 a person. We could have charged more, but we knew we had the gala coming up. And so, you know, it was an easy way to make $1,500 to $2,000 and just get it towards, it all goes towards the camp. And we all had fun, and, you know, had lots of young people, our camp volunteers, and everybody participate. Yeah, so it worked out.
That's fantastic. And does you know, builds the community and creates the engagement and raises the money. And now you have the opportunity to steward all of those people who participated.
Exactly. So we're really trying to grow our donor base. And so we're using these events to kind of leverage that. So we're planning a golf tournament now because it's such a hot commodity, and it's something some people can do right now and do it safely. So yeah, we're very grassroots. So we're trying to get to that next level.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. That sounds so
Thank you.
positive. Yeah. Well done. And Jennifer, you created a new e-newsletter, and you did some virtual fundraising events too. Would you like to share? Oh, great.
Yeah, sure. So we serve a national population, so we're a little different from some other camps. And so we try to have our fundraising and donor base reflect the, you know, sort of national picture that our campers come from. And so our biggest fundraiser of the year is actually a cycling event that does take place. We're in Montana, so kind of remote, but typically it raises between $300,000 and $400,000. And this year we we're hoping we could do it because it's an outdoor event. So our committee was holding out hope that we were going to be doing it in person up until about 6 weeks before the event, which takes place in late June. But we had kind of pulled the plug on in-person camp. So we felt like that was the best decision to make for our fundraising efforts as well, at least as an organization. Yeah. So kind of convinced our volunteer committee that puts this event together that we could do something virtually successfully, while we were also learning to do camp virtually this summer. But it did give us, like Deb said, the opportunity to really reach out to some folks who may not have participated or given at an in-person event, because it's a physical event. It's a 127-mile bike ride in one day. So there are a lot of people that does not include. And so we kind of called the acronym for our event is RATPOD, which stands for Ride Around the Pioneers in One Day. So we decided to call it RATPOD Unlimited and try to reflect that national participation that we have in our camp programs in this event as well. And so our committee really did a great job. It really invigorated them to reach out to people they might not have otherwise, and said, look, we just want you to join us in whatever way you can, wherever you can, doing whatever you can on this day in support of camp. And so we actually ended up having all 50 states and about 4 different countries represented in this event. And people went out, instead of riding a bike for 127 miles in a day, they went out and they walked their dog, or they, you know, we have a lot of rivers here in Montana. And so a lot of people went out and floated their way through their 127 miles. Or we've got my in-laws are in Arizona. They did a little golf cart parade and raised money that way. So it really just broadened people's perspective of how they could participate, who they could ask to participate, and changed, instead of having an entry fee, we made it an optional donation, but we still gave them options from $25 to $1,000 to participate. And they could earn, you know, tokens of appreciation or different incentive prizes for different levels of fundraising. So we transferred a lot of the things we would have done for in-person to this virtual setting, but it did open up the door to get people involved who would never make the trip to Montana, who would never ride their bikes 127 miles. And we were very conservative in our fundraising goal and said, well, if we could raise $150,000 this year, that would be great, which was about a third of what our goal would have been in person. And I think looking back, we wouldn't make that mistake again. We'd probably aim higher, because we ended up closer to about 275. So, you know, we probably did 75% of what our in-person normal event would raise. Our expenses were lower, obviously, and we had great participation. And so I think the test now will be, how can we steward those people and keep them engaged and part of our community, even though the folks who helped us do this and participated this year might be a very different group than have participated in the past.
Well, I think it brings up, thank you so much for sharing that, Jennifer, and congratulations on the success of that. And I think both Deb and Jennifer, your examples highlight this idea that people can access your work and see your work and be involved with you in such different ways in this virtual environment. And so that's a benefit to transferring these activities into this virtual world. So, so thanks so much for sharing that. So we'll move on to the next slide. I think it's really relevant to what you both shared with us just now, these aspects of creative engagement, right? So we see these, you know, creative ways to engage folks requiring 3 things: a novel experience that's related to your mission and inspires an ongoing relationship. So, I mean, I think it's especially important to delve into this term, novel experience. And, you know, I think that this is something that it has to feel a little new and fresh. And, you know, I know Zoom fatigue is a real thing that folks are talking about. I am pleased to say that I haven't personally, although I've personally felt it, like with, you know, meetings 8 hours a day sometimes, I haven't necessarily seen that with organizations and their interactions with donors. And, you know, I think it's pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's definitely possible to offer your friends something that feels new or interesting. A lot of us are like, I'm in my office all day. I'd like to do something new, like a trivia night. I'd like to interact with some people that I don't live with for a few hours. So I think that this is very possible. And then if we move on to the next slide, you know, we just have a few different characteristics and qualities of creative engagement in remarkable times that we thought we'd share with you. And of course, definitely keep dropping ideas or examples in the chat or any questions you might have. we think first of all, creating a sense of community is really important. So, we're all aware that people are seeking connection right now. And this time has felt kind of isolating for many of us. Don't be afraid to take a risk. This isn't the time to let perfect be the enemy of action. It's okay to try something, and it's okay to feel like it didn't go how you wanted it to feel. And that's fine. You can try again, and those who are close to you are going to be understanding. Establish new partnerships that can help both organizations. Who can you creatively partner with? Possibly partners you never would have dreamed of had you just had boots on the ground all the time, but in a virtual environment, that actually might make sense. And celebrate what you can. Even though this is a difficult time for everyone, it's okay. And I would say it's a good thing if we can offer your community some sort of joy and delight, even when things can feel less than joyful or delightful. And even if we can share that for a moment, it creates such a sense of community with one another that people are craving. Don't be afraid to make some new friends. We're hearing from many of our client partners that they're attracting new attendees to online offerings, like you were both just describing, for example, and new donors. As Kate showed, kind of in our macro environment slide, there are new donors all over the place. Don't be afraid to further engage them. And finally, it is November, which I can hardly believe, but in March and April, May, we didn't have much visibility about what was going to come next. And, a lot of us were maybe thinking 1 to 2 weeks in the future because we had no idea what was going to happen 3 weeks into the future. I think we're past that. It's time for us to lengthen our horizon. I think a 5-year plan, of course, it's great to work on something like that, but that's maybe not applicable in this moment as much as a 3-month plan, a 6-month, a 9-month plan that has some goals and some benchmarks in it. And, that has to be a living document, has to be revisited regularly. Things are still changing. But we really think that if you use this time to make a plan for what happens in A scenario or B scenario 3 months into the future, you're going to be in a much better position to continue engaging your constituents and the people that you care about. So I'm going to turn it back. Well, actually, let me just take a pause here. In terms of, does anyone else have thoughts they'd like to share? Or Kate, also, you might have some examples from clients you've been working with about what creative engagement you have seen and what has been positive and effective.
Well, I'll share that. So I think my role when we pivot back to me, right, and I'm a hand talker, right, is how do you take all the people you've engaged, figure out who those who could potentially be your major donors are, and then engage them even more deeply. So if I think about one organization that we're working with, it's a youth homeless organization, right? And they held a series of fireside chats. They're doing November is Homeless Youth Awareness Month, and they're doing a big virtual event. And they are set up in advance of the virtual event for us to take all of the names and all the people who attended and screen them, right? Because we know that we have access, we know they have some affinity. So we want to think about who are the 10 phone calls they could make to those who have the most ability. So I think when you're planning these engagement events, right, you can do engagement just for engagement's sake. But if you're planning engagement as a tool to get to the next piece of the fundraising sort of continuum, right, you want to make sure that while you're creating a sense of community for everyone, you're trying to figure out who are those folks that I can, connect with after this and try and go deeper. How can I figure out who might be able to make a major gift, engage them, and then go deeper? So I think, Deb had some great ideas. Jen had some great ideas, right? How do you think about, whatever your idea is, how do you get as many people in? And then how do you narrow that bigger pool into a smaller pool that you can then talk to about major gifts?
Great. Which is exactly what you're about to talk about, Kate.
Yeah.
Beautiful segue.
Right? So how do you move from engagement to major gifts, right? It's great to be friendly and welcoming and have walks and, you know, trivia events at $15 a person, right? It doesn't matter whether $15 is a lot of money to you or very little money to you. So how do you think about how to translate that to major gifts? And again, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies, but before that, like, how do you do that piece? So it's pennies on the dollar to wealth screen large groups of people. And if anyone is interested, right, like Wealth Engine does it, Blackbaud does it, there's lots of organizations that do it. There is no absolute overlap between the, you know, truth in the world and the results on those you know, screenings, but they can be directionally important. They're often false low, so very wealthy people that screen for not having that much money, and you'll be like, my major donor is coming in as not having a lot of money. But they often reveal that, you know, someone who, you know, Sarah was talking about Susie Smith, who's giving $250, and your wealth screening reveals that she has the capacity to be giving you $100,000 or $1 million every year, right? She might be more important than someone like me that, you know, you screen me and you're like, wow, if I work really hard, I could get her to, you know, $1,000. So think about like what tools you have, whether you use sort of pennies on the dollar wealth screening, you use relationship mapping with your volunteers. Make sure that you're thinking about how to narrow your, one of our colleagues, Brian Nevins, always says, it's a big pile of hay. How do you get it smaller, right? Because you need a smaller group of people to do the activities that we're going to talk about next. And then if you think about going from engagement, right, which is a pretty wide, ranging, a wide net, you're trying to get as many people as possible interested in the cause. How do you get to cultivation? So if anyone who knows me knows that I repeat, you know, ask for money, get advice, ask for advice, and get money. And so if you're thinking about how to do, you know, storytelling, meaningful engagement, or communicating purpose and impact, I think it's really interesting to look at these two different sort of, these are by columns, but if you look at them by rows, you're going to find that some of your donors really like to sort of, they like to think their donations. And then you're going to find sort of on the bottom rows that there's more people that really need to feel their way to their donations, right? So if I were to think about, and again, I'm just going to keep going with this homeless shelter because I know it well, right? So if there's a content expert that can talk about, you know, what are some of the causes of homeless? Why are, you know, Black and brown youth 83% more likely to be homeless than white kids, right? Who's the kind of content expert who has access to studies, right? So for you, like, what does camp do for kids? You know, what are some of the specific metrics that are happening, right? And then there's other people that just need personal stories. They need some video. They don't really want data. They want to be inspired. Think about who your donor is and how you're telling your story. Again, right? Some people on the bottom row, they want to be part of a virtual volunteer experience. They want to feel like they're part of, you know, making something happen and that they're, you know, it makes their heart full of joy. And then there's other people who are like, I want to sit down with your Excel spreadsheet and I want to help you think through some of these tough problems. I want to bring my business expertise and I want to get engaged and I want to help you. And what we know from this meaningful engagement is that volunteers give 7 to 10 times more than non-volunteers. So I will never tell you that volunteers will reduce your workload. In fact, I will tell you straight up front that engaging volunteers will increase your workload, right? If you ask a volunteer to do something, it will probably take 1.5 times as long at a minimum as if you had done it yourself. But if you're doing it as a way to engage the person in getting more deeply involved, and they have the ability to give 7 to 10 times more, and that's a good factor, it's 100% worth your time. And way more worth your time, especially if you've already done a lot of engagement, than continuing to just feed people into the pipeline that you never respond to. Because there is nothing worse, right, than you signaling, I gave them 250 on a gift of 50 the year before, and they didn't even call me and like say, wow, you're really interested. It looks like you want to get more involved. How do I engage you, right? So think about making sure that you're prioritizing this meaningful engagement. And then again, right, making sure that people understand the purpose and impact. We often think if we tell the stories, we engage them, that they'll just know. But sending some sort of personalized impact report, right? Your donations have made X possible. Assist them in framing this, right? This is what could happen as a result of philanthropy. We know that that is really powerful. So if we go to the next slide, right? Let's just think about how we do this virtually. So again, based on this survey, 43% of people had conducted a major gift solicitation via phone, video, or both methods to date. And I was on one of these panels last week with a client, and she was saying, you know, when this first started, if someone had told me that I was going to be doing solicitations virtually, I would have told them that I wouldn't do it. But gosh, it's been amazing, right? You sit down with the donor on Zoom, you can see their face. That's the only thing you're looking at. There's no waiter asking if you want water. There's no food to figure out how to eat while you're trying to share your materials. People are looking at their screen, they're present, they're available. And so what we found is that there have been 0 instances across the, $4 billion worth of campaigns that we're managing where someone said, no, I will not give because I am on Zoom. We've had people say, no, I will not give for all sorts of reasons, but no one to date, none of our colleagues, we survey it all the time, right? Hundreds of CCSers, no one has said, nope, they won't meet, they won't have a phone call, they won't meet because of Zoom. So think about whether there's someone who's older and you need to send them something in advance and then talk them through it on the phone, or there's someone who can be part of a Zoom call, but don't let virtual environments be the thing that holds you back. And then if we go to the next slide, there are things that we think can hold you back, right? So if you don't have something meaningful, which I'm sure all of you do, that could be what holds you back. But one of the things that's really important when thinking about how to structure a major gift, solicitation or proposal, is that you're not selling, right? If you're presenting a bunch of slides that show, what your dream plans could do, and you're trying to make them their idea, right? So here's our bold plans. And if we could raise, $5 million or $500,000 or $50,000, here's what we could do. I think this sort of states the obvious, but things that are really compelling. And again, all of you have a great case, so you already have a compelling vision. And bold visions and bold plans that say, we're going to do something really important and we need you, does a whole lot better than, well, we just kind of want to do what we did last year, but it's, we still really need your help. So think about how to make sure that you're even if it feels like what you're already doing, putting it in a way that feels really bold and really compelling. And again, right, large gifts are usually reflective of the dreams of the benefactor. So you want to make your organization fit their dreams. Don't talk about what you need. Talk about what could happen with transformational support. And make sure you're asking those questions that Sarah said at the beginning, right? People love to tell you why they're involved. Oh, my mother-in-law had cancer and it was terrible and she was isolated and alone and that was a lot for the family. And I've gotten involved because I don't want any child to have that feeling, right? They've then told you something, right? Really, well, what do you think would be most important? Well, I think some sort of wraparound family experience would be most important for me. Great, they've just told you, right, how to treat them. So we want you to make sure that you're never selling, like I can't sell anything, but you can talk to people, you can ask them about their dreams, their hopes, ask them questions, and then tell them how those dreams can really make a difference in the lives of kids. And then lastly, right, you want to make sure that every single ask that leads to a major gift is not just creating that opportunity for big impact, but that you have a key strategy. Is there someone that they really need to hear from that, should be part of that solicitation? Maybe they're the person who brought them in. Maybe there's someone who could really, that's the person they can't say no to. Maybe there's a piece that they really need. So make sure that your strategy, your context, and your relationships are completely set before you get to the place where you're asking people for money. Make sure, it sounds like all of you are thinking about these unique experiences, but make sure you're continuing to provide these unique experiences and that you're continuing to refine your group of people that you think about to those who could make major gifts, create those opportunity for big impacts, and then have confidence, move forward, and make asks. So we wanted to sort of give a little bit of time, because I know that for some people, right, you ask for money every day and others have questions. So we wanted to make sure to leave some time at the end in case there were any folks who had questions for Sarah or me.
It's a quiet group today. What I will say to Kate and Sarah is that I appreciate you guys touching on, we live in a world where we're so event dependent. And so when events are taken away from us, it's what happens to our donors? Do we not talk to them until the event happens next year? What do we do? So some of the things that you guys talked about today, I think is really helpful in the importance of keeping donors engaged with or without an event. And I think what you just shared, Kate, is relevant for everyone, because as you mentioned, a major gift to someone, and we could even take away the word major gift and just say gift. We could be talking about $500. We could be talking about $100,000. The process is exactly the same in our world. I mean, obviously, if you're going for $1 million, it's a little more. Thought through, but so I think that what you shared today is really valuable to everyone. So does anybody have any final questions? And then we would just ask that you fill out the session survey at the end. But if anyone has, we'll keep an eye on the chat here. Okay, well, Kate and Sarah, thank you so very much for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We wish you all the best of luck, especially working with immunocompromised kids in a pandemic. All of you are doing really important work. So wishing you all the success with your end of year fundraising.
Perfect. Thank you so much.